Hello, thank you for tuning into my channel. Today I'm going to figure out how much fabric I need for my son's graduation quilt. So if you want to check out that process, please stay tuned. Here is the picture of the graduation quilt, and this is just kind of the template that I drew out. Here's a reminder of the inspiration photo here. I have already, when I made this drawing, there were some changes that I wanted to make, so I've kind of drawn them in. You can see where this black pen is, because I wanted this design to be closer toward the center. So you can see here, it's closer toward the center. I've just moved it a little bit here before I started trying to figure out measurements. This is going to be a scrap quilt, so I am considering total yardage for the quilt, but I'm not going to purchase yards of fabric. I'm probably going to purchase like fat quarters and then cut them down into the widths that I need. I did take a few notes here, and I want to get these so that you can see how I'm coming up with this process. So for the drawing, we're going to make sure that we think in pixels, which is in the individual squares. And if you saw my last video, you know that 1 square equals 2 inches of the fabric. And then for the seam allowances, to make sure that we include the seam allowances, I'm going to add a 1/2 inch to the measurement of the squares. So that means that we're looking at 2.5 inch squares for the pixels. And this has nothing to do with actual quilt blocks. That's going to be the next step. So we're only thinking in terms of 2.5 inch squares. If you'll remember, I am going to use the Tumbling Blocks quilt pattern, my Tumbling Blocks ruler that I got from Missouri Star Quilt Company. And so even though we're using 2.5 inch squares as our regular mark, or our to figure out the yardage, the blocks are going to be different, and we'll get to those when I get to the next step. So here's what I'm going to do to figure out how much fabric I'm going to need. Again, I'm figuring out the total fabric per color, but I am going to probably purchase fat quarters that I'm going to cut down for our scrappy tumbling blocks. All right, so since we're starting with the 2.5 inch squares, I wanted to see how many squares I can get from one width of fabric strip. And so what I did was I divided 40, and you could use either 40, 42, or 44, depending on what you feel like the width of your strip is going to be. I normally use 40 because I know that it'll automatically give me some extra fabric. Okay, so for the squares per width of fabric strip, I divided 40 by 2.5 inches, and that gives me 16 squares. So for each strip of fabric that I cut, if it was 2.5 inches, I would get 16 squares out of that. And then I'm going to count the number of squares per color, and then I'll divide that number by the 16 squares to see how many strips I would need, how many of the 2.5 inch strips I would need to get that total number of squares. And then I will multiply that by 2.5 to see how many inches of fabric that I would need. And then I'll divide that by 36 inches, because that's the number of inches in a yard, to determine the yardage of the fabric that I'll need. Okay, so I've already done that, and I'll show you here with my calculator. That's not my calculator, not yet. Let's see. That's not a calculator. I'll go back. There it is. Okay, so for example, I started with the darkest blue fabric here, and you can see that the darkest blue is on this side. And I've labeled, even when I made my adjustments, I've labeled that as darkest blue. So when I'm piecing my my quilt, I'll know exactly how many blocks I'll need to make. All right, and I discovered that I had 184 squares on the quilt. And then I divided that number, since I know I'm going to get 16 squares out of each strip. This determines how many strips I would need for that 184 inches. And we have 11 and a half. So basically 12 strips. And then I'm going to multiply 12 strips times 2.5 inches. And so this would be the number of total inches that I would need for the darkest blue fabric. And then you just divide that by 36. And that gives you the yardage. And so this says that I would need 5/6 of a yard, but I'll just round up to the next quarter yard. So I'm going to get 1 yard of that darkest blue fabric. Okay. And I've also done the medium dark as well, which is right here in the quilt. And I came up with 1 1/4 yards. And so since I'm going to get fat quarters, so I would get 4 fat quarters of the darkest blue and 5 fat quarters of the medium dark blue. Just to give you an idea of how that's going to work. Okay, let's see if we can do one live on camera. I'm going to do a really small section. I'm going to start with this light yellow. And in order to determine how much I need of it, let me see if I can, I'm trying to zoom in, out, something so we can see the exact place it is. Okay, sort of, you can sort of see it. So what I'm doing is I'm going to count the number of squares that light yellow appears at all, even if it's just a little bit. Okay, and this is going to give me what I think is that excess of fabric that I need. I think it's going to be perfect as far as having enough fabric. I just don't want to not have enough. So I'm going to count from the bottom here. 1, 2, 3. And then the next row, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's a little bit on that one. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and a smidge on that one. 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. Okay, so for the light yellow, I'm just going to write it here. Light yellow. And I'm holding the camera and trying to write at the same time. So 30, well, I'll put the phone there because I can hold it. 30 squares. Okay. Now I know that I'm going to get 16 squares out of each strip. So to get the number of strips, I would divide 30 by 16. Here's 30. And of course, I already know that it's going to be 2 strips, but just for the sake of working it out. All right, so that's the number of strips. Oh. And then, so that would be 2 strips. Let me write it here. Equals 2 strips, and that's approximate, of course. And then if I divide that by, no, if I multiply that by 2.5, of course you would get 5 inches. And then I would divide that 5 inches by 36 and see what we get here. 5 divided by 36 equals, and that says 0.13888888 and so on. Again, rounding up to the next quarter yard. So really, I would only need 1 fat quarter of the yellow. But I'll probably, I don't know, I have to think of a way that I can get some different fabric. So I probably would get, a few more fat quarters so that I have enough to vary the tumbling blocks in that one. But I only need 1/4 yard of the light yellow. So I'll figure out all the other ones, and then I'll show you what the measurements are. all the measurements are here for the yardage that I need. Some of them I need really small amounts of yardage, but I think I am going to go ahead and get 3 or 4 fat quarters for each one of those. But I'm really excited to head to the fabric store and see what's next. I'm really excited to move forward with the process of this graduation quilt. I don't think I've ever really explored using the tumbling blocks to create a specific design, so I'm ready to see what that looks like. I have my fabric choices here. These are from my stash that I've already picked, so I'm taking these with me to the fabric store to put them with everything else, and hopefully I'll be able to get a great selection to choose from. If you have any questions about what you've seen in this video, please leave them below in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think about this project. Thumbs up this video, share it with your friends. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that notification bell so you can know whenever I put out a new video. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!